University. He was my command master chief when I was over at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. So if you ever see me or hear me today say CMC or Master Chief, I really do mean Mr. Willis. He had a long storied career in the Navy before joining us, but he's here too. Students out there, if you email him directly, he's easy to find, tyrone.willis@ucus.edu. He will be quick to answer any questions, ideas, things you might have. I'm a little slower, but I eventually also answer emails. So definitely feel free to reach out to me. I don't know, Mr. Willis, did you want to open with anything?
No, I just want to say thank you all for having us this today, and we look forward to inform you all about some of the opportunities we have in Uniformed Service University, and most importantly, just to enlighten you all about opportunities in whether military medicine and medicine in general. So anything we can assist. Now, I know when you hear about recruitment, you think we're trying to recruit for something, but most of the thing we're trying to recruit for is getting students into medical school or assist them in any kind of the health sciences. So, we win regardless what route you take, okay? So without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Dr. Santiago, and he would have a wonderful presentation for you.
And I really want to underscore that. I mean, our salaries are paid by the US taxpayer. If you do not join, we're not recruiters. If you do not join the military, that is fine. We just want to help you in your career pursuits. And if that includes medicine, not even just military medicine, but medicine, you want to be a physician, we want to help. Professor Barnese, if you can allow me to share my screen either by making me a co-host or altering your settings.
Got it. 1 second.
Definitely feel free to interrupt me as we go, anyone. The way I have my computer set up and when I'm pushing slides in Zoom, I cannot monitor the chat or look at raised hands. So Mr. Willis will probably interrupt if for whatever reason you just don't feel comfortable doing so. But truly, I want this to be as informal as possible, but it's frequently hard to have a kind of back and forth in the beginning anyway. But I don't know, we get there. So again, our school, the long name of our school is the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Frequently, we just shorten it to Uniformed Services University or USU. Sometimes in the acronym, you'll see an HS attached to it, so it's USUS. But we are America's medical school. And one thing I want to say about that before we go any further is a lot of what I say, because I'm in uniform, I need to be sensitive to this idea that I'm talking about our med school, but when I talk about like admissions or things like that, these opinions or any assertions I make are my opinions, my assertions. They do not reflect the official policy or position either of the Uniformed Services University or the Department of Defense. So with that said, let's take a look at our base from the air. And so our base is the Naval Support Activity Bethesda, which is it borders Washington, D.C. We're in suburban Maryland. And so here's our campus, the Uniformed Services University, and it's on the same base as the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where we have a lot of different residencies and a lot of different medical specialties. This main thoroughfare is Wisconsin Avenue, and on the other side of Wisconsin Avenue are the National Libraries of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health. So there's this whole medical center. I mean, the metro stop is called Medical Center. There's this whole heart of medical right here in Montgomery County, Maryland, where we are. And one of the things I always think about when I think about who we are, well, the most obvious thing is we provide medical care to military service members. And, frequently when you look at the photos in our advertising or our website, you see, that's who you see as military service members. But the reality is, we don't just provide care to healthy young people. Half of the military are military families. And there's a large chunk of our beneficiaries in the military health system that are retirees. So there's just a lot of routine medical care that we do in military medicine. But beyond that, you're going to see a lot of what we also talk about and what really gets us excited are things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief missions, HADR. Like we've got a lot of active duty medical personnel currently deployed in the COVID response, and they're not deployed overseas. They're going to locations within the continental United States. There's one picture of, we have an alum, he's an Army colonel now, and he's an astronaut, and he just came back from the International Space Station last year. But most of us really down to earth, and I cannot emphasize enough that like most of what we do is just in regular hospitals. Yeah, we have medevacs and things like that we do, but we don't have a whole lot of deployments like we did 10 years ago. We just, I don't know, a lot of what we do is just regular medical care. But there's something else though about military medicine, because I stayed in the military and I did not have to. So I actually did not attend the Uniformed Services University. I actually went through a different path called the Health Professions Scholarship Program. And so our med students, they owe 7 years of active duty after residency training, but I only owed 4 years. So I actually could have gotten out of the military back in 2008. But I stayed in because the military is incredibly good at sponsorship. And that's probably something I'll pack at another time. But I think first things first, I sort of want to talk about these kinds of pathways into military medicine. So on the right-hand side, I described this thing called the scholarship. It's the Health Professions Scholarship Program. And that's what I did. It's not exactly competitive, but there are definitely people who don't get selected for it. So just like medical school, there are selection criteria. Similarly with HPSP, you have to be selected for it. But the thing I want to emphasize about this scholarship program is that it just doesn't go to super geniuses, future MacArthur Genius Grant winners. It just goes to regular people going to med school. Like if you can get into med school, you can reasonably expect that you have a chance at one of these HPSP scholarships. And so I had no experience with the military at all before I joined the scholarship. And then I went to a civilian med school where the Navy just paid my tuition. I basically went to a recruiter. They, helped me through the process. And then when I got selected, I just started civilian med school. You actually become an officer in the reserves in that program. And you go on active duty 45 days a year. But truly, if your med school says, well, they can't go, and that happened to me my first 2 years, I just couldn't leave med school. I just went on active duty by checking in at the nearest reserve center on day 1, and then on day 45, checking out. And I was still just wearing civilian clothes every day of my life. It's not like ROTC at undergraduate campuses where if you have friends who are doing ROTC somewhere where they're constantly doing some sort of ROTC activity, like waking up at 0 dark 30 to go do physical training. That's not what I did in med school. Similarly, when I went to an officer development school to sort of like introduce me to the military, it was not boot camp. I'm not like crawling in the mud under barbed wire, like trying to not get, my rifle all muddy. It's none of that. It's I don't know how else to describe officer development school as, you're just learning the basics of leadership. This HPSP scholarship, there's a little bit of a stipend. I know it's listed here as a salary. There's this signing bonus and this idea of a 4-year commitment. So it's 4 years of med school. And let's say you decide to become a pediatrician. That's a 3-year residency program after med school. So med school, 3 years, say, of pediatrics residency. It's when you graduate from that pediatrics residency and you're eligible to sit for the board certifying exam in pediatrics. That's when your clock of 4 years payback starts for HPSP. Same thing with Uniformed Services University on the left-hand side. So the big difference that I want people to pay attention to if they're really going to do this, like 3, 4, 5 years from now, is the commitment at the Uniformed Services University is, again, med school, residency. Or let's say they do a 4-year residency like psychiatry. After these 8 years in uniform, uniform services, University School of Medicine, and then say 4 years of residency training, say at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, like me, then their clock starts to owe 7 years after residency. And so why the big difference? Well, the big difference is at our med school, because you're on active duty and an officer, you are getting paid a salary. Like basically at the 1st and the 15th of the month, $2,500 mysteriously appears in our med students' bank accounts because that's their salary. Like, and I want to emphasize, our medical students are on active duty. Now, they don't wear these uniforms day to day. They wear this camouflage uniform day to day, which is just super comfortable, I need to say. And every time I'm not wearing this uniform, I miss all the pockets. And it's only a little bit of a joke. It's kind of an incredible luxury. Like me in med school, I was dressed much more formally as a civilian, like, going to the hospital and stuff. But when our med students are in the hospital working, they're wearing this uniform, and I don't know, it's a different world. But so many of our med students and the HPSP recipients have no connection to the military. So even though it is pretty alien at first, I would say our med students, after a little bit, they stop feeling like it's a costume. Being a military officer becomes part of their identity. Okay, so there's this salary, it's actually now like $70,000 or maybe $72,000 a year. And it includes both the pay you get as a second lieutenant or an ensign, but it also includes things like housing allowance, basic allowance for subsistence, things like that. One thing I did want to talk about are these ranks. So you heard me say second lieutenant. If you're in the Army and the Air Force and you're at our med school, you're a second lieutenant. If you're in the Navy or the Public Health Service, you're an ensign. And so like me, I'm a Navy captain. The equivalent rank in the Air Force would be colonel. And so these are the ranks in the military, the officer rank. So this is an 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, 06. And so when you graduate medical school, whether HPSP or USU, you actually skip 02. Medical doctors in the military will never be a first lieutenant or lieutenant junior grade. We go straight to captain or lieutenant. And then the promotion kind of happens. And so what does it look like moving across these ranks in a career? Like I'm at year 21. Well, when I was a medical student, one of the, and I said we go on, when you have the scholarship, you go on active duty for 45 days. Well, one of the rotations I did for a 45-day rotation was rotation in flight surgery, where you're basically, flight surgeons are the medical officers assigned to squadrons. And so that was really great. Again, I was never an 02, I was never a lieutenant junior grade. So I just stick in this photo from A Few Good Men, because you could look at his stripes here. Here you can see this symbol means he's a lawyer in the Judge Advocate General Corps. He's JAG, and here you can see he's a lieutenant commander. This symbol, the oak leaf with an acorn in the middle, is the symbol for the medical corps. And so as a lieutenant, now I'm a doctor. Here I'm an intern, and I am in pain because this is the combat casualty care course in San Antonio, where there's all of these simulated patients, simulated operations, field exercise, and you're just trying to like practice medicine, but in these incredibly austere environments. And then, it prepares you for like actual deployment. And this was my first deployment when I was a lieutenant. That was back in 2005. My second deployment, I was a lieutenant commander. That was in 2010 in Afghanistan. And then, I just kept moving on through the ranks. I eventually became a commander, and I was the residency program director at Walter Reed. And I really miss these residents. And it was really fascinating when I was invited to be in the retirement ceremony of my program director. This is Captain Paul Hammer. He was my residency training director when I was a resident. And here I am now as a residency training director at his retirement ceremony. Like when a bunch of my friends saw it on Facebook, they were like, that's just bananas. Like, how did that happen? When did we become, the ones in charge? And my story about Captain Hammer, this is my favorite story about Captain Hammer. So There's a movie, I think it's on HBO right now, and it's called Antoine Fisher. It's the directorial debut of Denzel Washington, and he plays a Navy psychiatrist. This is actually based on a book on someone's autobiography, so it's based on a true story. And it's hysterical to me because Denzel Washington and some members of the production team visited Naval Medical Center San Diego when I was an intern there, or a second-year resident there. And when the movie came out, we're all looking at it, and it's like, this is Commander Hammer's, because he was a commander at the time. This is Commander Hammer's ribbon rack. And so I think the producers showed up, took like the ribbons like off my boss and said, oh, we need this exact set for Denzel, and probably just brought that his literal ribbon rack over to the set. And so that's really everything I kind of want to focus on. And there's a lot of questions I can answer. So for example, one question I frequently get is, well, what kinds of physicians does the military need? Well, it's literally all of them. Now, granted, I'm exaggerating because, for example, the Navy doesn't train pediatric cardiologists. But again, we do need pediatricians. Orthopedic surgery, if you wanted to subspecialize and do a fellowship in hand, like ortho hand, that's definitely a thing. Psychiatry, we train a lot of subspecialty training in child and adolescent psychiatry because we have overseas billets where we must have a child psychiatrist, like in Yokosuka, Japan, Guam, Okinawa. So some people think they're a little bit limited in terms of what they can be, what they can specialize in military medicine. But, it's, as I said, half the military are military families. I think the only other place, big question that I usually get and need to answer is like, well, wait, where do you do your rotations? Well, it's not all at Walter Reed. Walter Reed is not big enough to have all of our students rotate there for the core clerkships, like in pediatrics, obstetrics, surgery, psychiatry, family medicine. What they do is our students actually go around the world. Like this is Naval Medical Center, San Diego. This is Tripler Army Medical Center out in Honolulu. I mean, they rotate truly all around the country for required rotations, like Jacksonville, Florida, San Antonio, Texas, or even sometimes for elective rotations. Like I've talked to students who were in Naples, Italy, or Rota, Spain for some of their rotations. Yeah, it's just a really great time to see how medicine is done in different parts of, in this case, the military health system, but it's really like in a lot of different places. I think the other big question, maybe this is truly the final question that I'm going to pre-answer. It's this question around like, well, who gets to be a USU student? It's a great question. I don't have numbers for the Health Profession Scholarship Program, so the only numbers I have is for USU. And this is a couple of years old because I should probably ask the Associate Dean for admissions for some updated numbers. But I mean, it's pretty stable. It doesn't really change much. Like every year we get about 3,000 applicants for 171 spots. It's always 171. You can see there's only this narrow sliver of a few public health service physicians that we train. It's mostly Army, with the remainder split between the Air Force and the Navy. And of those 3,000, we invite about 600 for interview. And from those 600, there are 275 usually offers that go out to get that class of 171. Because I mean, a lot of our students, or a lot of our prospective students, I don't blame them. They ultimately decide, I don't know if I could really commit to that long of a commitment, but actually a lot of them, they actually sign on to HPSP and go to a civilian institution because they still love the idea of military medicine. But again, it's just the service commitment felt a little too long. This class was 50-50 women and men. Not usually. In the past, it's been more skewed, a little more skewed towards men, but I think we're pretty much at 50-50 nowadays. And if I'm always asked about, well, what are the numbers of students who represent groups that are underrepresented in medicine and science? So out of the 171, you could look at these numbers about non-white minorities and URM students or first-gen students. And then finally, geographic diversity is always something people are curious about. So tell you what, I've got a lot of other things I can talk about, but let me stop sharing my screen now because I just saw a little number 10 in the chat. All right, Mr. Willis, were there any obvious questions I should answer?
No, not yet, Doc.
Okay, so actually, let me put this to the group. Any questions so far?
I have a quick question. It's about, so when you complete your 4 years of medical school, if you do the HPSP program, can you opt to serve before you do a civilian residency, or do you have to complete your residency first and then serve? Because I know of a doctor who opted, he did, I think, like one intern year and then went to serve and then went back to the States to complete his residency after he served.
Yeah, so great question. Great question. I want to be clear, if you do HPSP, the expectation is you do a military residency. So after you graduate from med school, you're going to have to do an internship at a minimum because 1 year of postgraduate training, PGY is postgraduate year. Once you finish a PGY1 training, that's when most states will allow you to apply for a medical license. So the traditional path in the Navy, for example, is apply for that internship training. It could be in internal medicine, surgery, whatever, anesthesia. And if you want, you can go out to the fleet and be a flight surgeon. You could be a general medical officer on a ship. You could be a dive medical officer working in the vicinity of submarines or SEALs. Like one of my friends, she went to Brown for med school, and then she, on an HPSP scholarship, then she actually got a full deferment to do civilian psychiatry training. So she's kind of the exception there. Then she did a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship. And it's so funny that she's now a psychiatrist with one of the SEAL teams. I just think that's just that has to be the most interesting job in the fleet for a psychiatrist. But even if you're not specialized like her or subspecialty trained, the Navy, not so the other services, but the Navy traditionally has had these jobs called GMO, General Medical Officer. But to be clear, you have to be able to get a medical license. And the only way to do that is with at least 1 year of postgraduate training. And many other states are now making it 2 years of postgraduate training.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Paula Avery. I'm our registrar, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the application process.
Yes, so the application process for our med school is basically you just apply in AMCAS, which is the application system for applying to any regular medical school. Just like any other application, there'll be a secondary application from our med school. And what's nice is, unlike other med schools, there's no charge to apply to our med school and receive the secondary application. To apply for the scholarship, you must go through a recruiter. And so visiting a recruiter, talking to a recruiter has been traditionally, I think, for a lot of applicants, a mixed experience. Some recruiters, they're dialed in, they know exactly how this thing happens. Other recruiters, not so much. They have to find a health profession specific recruiter to guide them through the process. One thing as a complete aside, let's say medicine's not for you, or being a physician is not for you, and you ultimately decide to go a different direction like physical therapy. The military also has a doctor of physical therapy pathway, and it's very similar. The training though is with Baylor College. And when you finish there, you're eligible to be, a board certified physical therapist with a DPT degree. And I don't know the details. Again, I'm not a recruiter, but I was on a call like this, and one of the students said, I'm between being a physician and physical therapy. And I said, well, wait, let's Google military physical therapy together. And so we were looking at it, and this program with Baylor came up, and I thought, what else do I not know? Like, what other medical trainings and specialties am I not completely aware of? Because again, not a recruiter, I'm a doctor, that's all I know. So again, applying to the Uniformed Services University School of Medicine, it's just applying like any other med school in the AMCAS system. I don't know what the letters mean. Applying for the scholarship, you apply through a recruiter, apply to med school. Most people do that process concurrently. And then if you get into med school, that makes it even higher odds that the Army, Navy, or Air Force would select you for the scholarship.
So you would first apply to med school and then the HPSP program?
Short answer is yes, but I actually tell a lot of people to apply to HPSP, or at least start that process simultaneously.
Okay.
Because there are extra things. Actually, there's extra things on the USU side, like security clearance, and you don't have to get like a full physical exam, but there's like medical qualifications. So there's some other acronym there with respect to getting, I was about to say getting cleared medically, but it's not even like fully cleared. It's just kind of like a preliminary thing. Many applicants to the School of Medicine at USU need medical waivers for things. They're minor things, but they just still need waivers. I imagine the same thing is necessary for the Health Profession Scholarship Program, because basically you have to clear all of these officer accession requirements, in addition to the sort of regular academic stuff that anyone's managing. So, but I have heard of it where some people get like a preliminary acceptance to HPSP while their med school applications are in process. And so like once they are accepted to a medical school, then they're like more formally offered the HPSP scholarship. I don't know if it's all service branches or just one of them, but that's definitely a story I've heard multiple times.
And also, Dr. Santiago and others, if anyone interested in talking to a recruiter, a medical recruiter, please let me know. A good friend of mine is one in a local area of Maryland, but they are able to reach out to ones throughout the country. So if anyone is interested in a particular medicine they want to get to, whether it's physical therapy or nursing or something like that, I'd be more than happy to get that information for you to assist you in any health science that you're interested in.
Other questions?
I have a quick question. What control do you have over your assignments? I was a former staff sergeant in the Air Force, and so I had no control over where I was assigned. I was a pharmacy tech. But what control do you have over your assignments as an officer? Like, where do you end up going?
So I often say none, zero, like absolutely none. The needs of the Navy dictate where I go. And then I caveat it, because I spent the first 7 years of my long storied Navy career in Southern California, because I was at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. And then right after that, 3 years at Naval Hospital Camp Pendleton. I'm still not a great surfer. But seriously, if I'm ever out there and I'm visiting you all in person, I'm going to say hello and then probably go surfing. And then I spent the next 14 years of my life here in Bethesda. And I was actually, my wife and I would have loved to have gone to Japan or rode to Spain. Like we would have loved to have been overseas at Okinawa. Like Mr. Willis was in Okinawa for the longest time. But I think one of the things I really understood was the forces surrounding assignments. And I think I was just talking about this book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, by Cal Newport. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown. I think because one of my mentees, she was saying, hey, I'm reading this book. And I said, oh, I read that too. She's like, oh, can we talk about it? Because I'm trying to, she's like, I want to figure out what that looks like. And I said, that's a really, really good question. And so I just kept doing these things that the Navy needed. For example, they just needed medical educators. I'm like, actually, I'm not half bad at teaching. So let me try to be, let me do some deliberate practice and try to become an expert at clinical education. Well, you know what? We don't need a whole lot of like expert medical clinical educator types, in 29 Palms, California. So that was, I just started going to where the concentration of medical education was. And here, that's why I'm here at the med school. This is actually my second tour at the med school. I didn't even ask for it. Somebody just said, that's where you're going with like a knife hand. Dr. Santiago, you are going back to the School of Medicine. So we always can actually influence our careers if we just sort of know, if we know the playbook. Like I'm always telling prospective med students, there's no playbook for getting into med school, except there's a playbook. And so, you sort of have, I'm going to push slides. Okay, everyone, I'm going to go again, full on mansplaininess. Sorry, not sorry. Mr. Willis, how are my slides?
They're great, Dr. Santiago. You're fine.
Okay, so this idea, so again, with assignments and having no control over it. Well, one of the things is actually understanding the playbook where there is no playbook, but there's a playbook. And so what do I mean by that? So for a lot of prospective med students, I think the thing they don't understand well enough to sort of explain to others is the unknown unknowns. Okay. Mr. Willis, what screen was I sharing?
Sharing the one that had the knowns unknown. It was like your secondary with the black background that you had.
Okay.
It's one you use for teaching.
Okay, just because my Zoom went wonky. It's still going wonky. I've never had this before.
It's up now. You're not showing full screen. There you go.
Okay, does it say on deadlines?
Yes, it does.
Okay, now everything's back to normal. Okay, so this idea of unknown unknowns, I'm always asking prospective med students, what are you doing to make the things you don't know that you don't know unknown unknowns? How are you making them known unknowns? Okay, so what do I mean? Here's one example. So a lot of med students, like actually concurrent matriculated med students, not just our med school, but like everywhere, they got in not on their first attempt, but their second or third cycle through and applying. Well, I'll tell you, one of the frequent things they are in their story, one element that's frequently in their stories is nobody told them about deadlines. So when you look at med school, like application requirements and deadlines, the deadlines are always something like November, maybe the first week of December. And that's bonkers because AMCAS opens like that first Monday in June or that last Monday in May. And the second or third time through, finally, somebody has told them, you need to click submit on day one, or at least week one. And you need to tell the registrar, all the letter of recommendation writers, like I need to have a complete application in June. And why is that? Well, again, in the playbook, that doesn't exist, and now it's a known known for these applicants is that, like USU, remember how I said we have like 600, we invite 600 people for interviews? Well, in the summer, that's when we have 600 interviews. But by the time, we get to that deadline of November, I don't know how many interviews there are, but it's not like 600. Like it might be 11. I'm not the associate dean for admissions, but I don't know. But you'd rather have a complete application when the machine has 600 applications to dole out. Similarly, another story that they'll say is they would sit on secondary applications for like 4 weeks, the first time through. Then they'll read on Reddit or something that people were like, oh yeah, my strategy is always to turn around a secondary in 72 hours. And then it's like, well, how do they do that? Because, there are like these 3 essay prompts or short answer prompts that you gotta, write a nice coherent answer to. Well, apparently you could at least look up what schools asked last year. Like there's some website, or I think even schools will just put it on their website. And here's our secondary questions. So you could even pre-answer them and just wait until the secondaries come and you've already got a draft answer to their questions. So truly, what is it, if you're a prospective med student, how well do you sort of understand all of these buckets in the application? For example, most med schools look at clinical experience. And so I want to know, like if I'm your sponsor, if I'm your mentor, I want to know, how are you filling that clinical experience bucket? And I get it. Like a lot of students don't have programs at their schools that are kind of like these pipelines right into a local hospital to shadow physicians. So what do I tell them? I tell them, well, honestly, just get used to people saying no, because all you need is one physician out there to say, yes, why don't you shadow me in my practice? Why don't you shadow me at the hospital? Or our hospital has a whole program. You just email this person and then you'll do some training for privacy and stuff. And then you can shadow me all you want. And then before you know it, you've got like 60 clinical shadowing hours, in that bucket in the application. Or research. Some people get into med school without ever doing research, but they kind of answer this question in the application of like, what are the kinds of problems you want to solve? What are the kinds of problems you want to get close to? So you don't have to like necessarily fill all of these buckets, but you have to ask, like, is the bucket really empty? Like, okay, I get it. You didn't do bench research and like use a pipette and stuff, but have you done any other kind of scholarly activity? Or, can one of your letters of recommendation sort of speak to your ability to think through problems in lab? Similarly, with letters of recommendation. So how are you filling this bucket in letters of recommendation? Well, you can imagine, so I was on the admissions committee like 10 years ago. Sometimes there's like 3 letters of recommendation that all repeat the CV. And I know how this happens. It's like, Professor so-and-so, would you be willing to write me a letter of recommendation? Of course. And then, here's my CV. Well, so now I've got, if you do that 2 more times, you basically have 3 people who are just going to repeat your CV. And it doesn't really tell the admissions committee in that letter of recommendation something that they don't see anywhere else. It's like, they get it. You were, class president, or you did volunteer work at this place. Yeah, like we don't need to read it 4 times. So what do you do instead? Oh, Dr. Barnes, thank you so much for agreeing to write a letter of recommendation. This follow-up email could be really powerful. The reason why I'm so glad you're writing my LOR is because you saw me do this, and then in your class I did that, and when working with other students in the class and the TA this and other stuff. If that reminds your professor or whatever letter writer of just like what you did, and then it's like, oh yeah, they did do that. Oh, I could comment about this. Oh, and then they have this skill. Like that's the ninja move. Otherwise it's who knows what they're going to write. Because truly in the application, all of those things, I said this, the application should tell the reader what problems you want to get close to, what questions you want to solve, but what's your why? And if you answer the question, why medicine, in a way that sounds like only you could have written it, like that's what success looks like. Because the application is a lot of writing, not just writing the personal statement, but just writing and organizing. And that kind of writing is a form of thinking. So like in the personal statement, we can see if you're concrete or if you're abstract, and it's okay to be specific or general, but are you doing that deliberately?
Hey, Dr. Santiago.
Yeah.
Hey, Kareem raised their hand.
Okay, fire away.
Yes, sir. So while you had the previous slide up, so does having any prior military service affect your application in any sort of way?
Yes. I actually think not just for our med school, because I think many med schools would like to say that military veterans attend their med school. I actually don't know this for a fact at other med schools. Our med school has a lot of military veterans in it relatively. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I was about to say the vast majority, and I think that's true. I think the vast majority just don't have, they weren't in the military, but I also think they don't have a military connection. Like most of the students I mentor, none of them have like family in the military or anything like that. And so, you know, if that military experience sort of speaks to something in your personal statement, or maybe a former commanding officer writes a letter of recommendation, or your first sergeant, you know, if that first sergeant's writing a letter of recommendation that says something about, you know, about you being a leader in the unit, like you promote inclusion and belonging in the unit, like that could be really, really powerful, because those are the kinds of people I think any campus, medical school or otherwise, would want.
So to give you a little bit of a background, so in my situation, I went into the reserves. I have one more year on my contract
Mhm.
in the United States Air Force. I went through security forces training. I deployed once to Kuwait and Iraq.
Were you at Camp Arif, John, or Ali Al Salim?
No, I was at Ali Al Salim, and I actually got recognized there by the base commander, the wing commander, and
Nice.
fire chief. So,
Yeah. And so, you know, I think all schools, and again, not just med schools, but I think all schools are trying to assemble a class. And so, you know, in assembling a class, you don't want a couple hundred people that are all the same. You want people who are just going to bring different things to the table. And so that's definitely something you could build out and then explain in an application. Let's see. I'm not going to be able to see if like people nod or put a thumbs up or somehow vote, but how useful is it for the audience for me to sort of talk about the MCAT? Because I could go on and on and on about the MCAT. But I really have a couple of points, so I could keep it short. I'm looking at the clock and it's 3:15 Eastern time, so I kind of want to respect everyone's time. I don't know, Mr. Willis, if you look out there for thumbs upness, what does it look like? Should I spend 10 minutes unpacking the MCAT?
I'm looking now. Yes, I see some hands. Yes.
Kareem says yes, that's
Yes.
enough for me.
It-
Okay, so the thing I always want people to sort of think about with the MCAT is this quote that somebody once told me, I don't know where. But so what does this mean? The MCAT, the information on the MCAT is a mile long, but only an inch deep. I think it's because when I've talked to people about MCAT studying, particularly those who are MCAT tutors, they find that a lot of people who first approach the MCAT think they really have to go deep in everything. You actually don't have to go deep in everything. You just have to kind of get as close to everything as possible and not very deep. And in terms of like figuring out, well, what's the content and stuff, I mean, really just look at what the Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC, puts out there, and really try to understand the test. Like this is what, like I'm always asking, what do smart students know? And if I can answer that as a student, then I think, okay, I have a better understanding of how to go after it. It's kind of like the SAT. My daughter's 17. She just took the SAT back in March. And I told her, you just have to figure out the SAT. Because if anyone out there took the SAT, if you remember the math, those math questions on the SAT are not built like math questions that an actual math teacher would ask you. They're sort of unique to the SAT. Similarly, when you look at Chem Phys or Biochem or Psych Soc or whatever on the MCAT, I think of Professor Barnice. The questions that he might ask in chemistry are really built differently than chemistry questions on the MCAT. Like there was one professor who asked me, what do you recommend I tell students who take the MCAT, they don't do well, and then they come to me and say, Professor, you didn't teach me this in biology. And so I told her, you should probably tell them that your job is to teach biology. Your job is not to teach the MCAT. Like they can teach themselves the MCAT. Okay, so what do I mean by teach yourself the MCAT? Or like, what do I mean that, the biology professor is not teaching to the MCAT, they're teaching biology. This is the example question, the sample question on the AAMC's website for biochem. So there's this long, scary passage that goes even longer and is super scary, and then asks this question. The researchers chose a concentration of 0.3 millimolar IAA as the working concentration for any additional studies instead of 1 or 2 millimolar. What is the likely reason for this? And then panic ensues. I don't know what IAA is. Okay. If you are a sort of expert at the MCAT, this would not freak you out. In fact, I've taken standardized tests for so long. Like 2 years ago, I took my board recertification exam, it's all multiple choice. It doesn't freak me out. So I look at this. Okay, I don't know what IAA is. Well, guess what? Predictably, the passage says what IAA is. It is iodoacetate. I don't know what iodoacetate is. Well, the passage tells you it's a glycolytic inhibitor. Okay. So IAA is a glycolytic inhibitor. Why did they choose this smaller concentration of this glycolytic inhibitor rather than this larger one of 1 or 2? I don't know. Well, when I look at the figures, I'm like, well, let me start with the figures. Okay, so I see IAA, I see 0.3, I see 1, I see 2, and I see it again and again. Here, I see the asterisks over all 3. Here, I see the asterisks over all 3. Here, I see the asterisks indicating clinical or indicating statistical significance, p less than 0.05 versus control. Yes. So here in this figure, 1 and 2 millimolar concentrations are different than the control. 0.3 is not different than the control. Fascinating. Okay. And they're different with what? LDH release. Okay, so the answer is going to have something to do with LDH release. And LDH release is nowhere among the 4 answers. Oh, and panic ensues yet again. You go back. Wait, LDH release is an indicator of cell death. Aha, cell death. I don't see cell death anywhere. Oh, look at that. They actually used a synonym for cell death. If they wrote cell death here instead of cytotoxicity, this question would be so much faster to answer, so much easier to answer. But notice, I didn't have to actually bring any knowledge out from the outside into this question. Like I really could answer this entire question just by looking at the passage. And so the more questions you do like this, where you're like, I don't know what any of this stuff is, but I basically just got to interpret what's in the passage, you can get this question right. You could also get the second question right related to the passage. And you know what, you could do it as an exercise, just looking at the time. It's actually the third question where you need to bring in outside information. But remember when I said, information that's tested on the MCAT is a mile long, but only an inch deep. You don't have to go super deep here. Really, truly, the only thing you need to understand or remember and bring from the outside into this test is something about neurons, something about nerve cells, something about the action potential. And the answer here is returning to resting potential, because what you need to understand from this passage is IAA is going to mess up moving sodium and potassium against their concentration gradient. So that way, when you ruin that, you're going to ruin the neuron's ability to return to a resting potential because those ions can't move because you've interrupted all the energy production from the sodium potassium ATPase. And so if you start seeing this kind of question where it's like, oh, I actually have studied that. I could totally bring that from the outside into the exam. The hard part is how they sort of hide it, kind of like SAT math. I always feel like they're hiding the math concept that's, being tested there. And so the more of these you see, you could get just like one more question right in this section, or then another question right in this section. Because here's the thing, on the MCAT, and actually in many standardized tests, once you pass that 50th percentile, which is 500 on the MCAT, the questions start being worth more and more. Like the difference between the 75th percentile and the 90th percentile on the MCAT is just a handful of questions. It's really just like going from a 508 to 514, from the 75th to the 90th percentile, just a handful more questions. So as you're studying for the MCAT, you're not trying to do a deep dive in everything and memorize everything. I mean, you want to memorize some things, but you really want to start understanding what else is going on. So like this question, my bio students, do you see why we care in our article discussions about the stars? That's what the MCAT's wondering. It's like, those stars and statistical significance, if it's just a definition, what do the stars mean in statistical significance? And it's just like 4 definitions, only one of it's right. Well, everybody's going to get that question. But what if you had to take that knowledge and then interpret it? Those are the kinds of doctors we want. And so I really believe that tests like the MCAT and other tests, it's really truly responsive to deliberate practice. So if you're studying for the MCAT, or actually for like an exam in an actual college class with actual college exam answers for sciencey stuff, passive learning is going to fail you. I mean, that's just not what smart students do. So I could talk forever about active learning, but it's much easier to just read about active learning. I also think a growth mindset is really, really important. Like if you are a fixed mindset person, that kind of mindset, it's like, well, I'm just as smart as I am, and I'm not that kind of smart, and I can't do math, whatever. That's a fixed mindset. It's kind of like with me with running. I was never an athlete, but at some point I realized, you know what? I could probably train and run faster. I wasn't too confident of it, but that was just enough of a growth mindset that eventually led me to running 5Ks and then years later running a marathon. But you can imagine if I had a fixed mindset, I would never have achieved that marathon or any marathon after. It's just like with the MCAT. If you don't have a growth mindset and you don't have active learning, like I don't know what to tell you. Well, what is active learning, growth mindset? Like what's something you could do mechanically? Well, just like in this running thing I'm talking about, I actually started to like track my running, how much I was running, the distance, the time. I was writing my pace. And then I was like changing it up, and keeping track of what I was doing made me modify what I was doing. So like if you keep track of the questions you're getting wrong, you could sort of understand, well, why am I getting it wrong? Oh, well, this one physics equation keeps coming up and I don't have it at my fingertips. I should probably memorize that. Or yet another Krebs cycle question, I really need to like not look at the Krebs cycle and then just walk around the quad and sort of try to draw it out on a blank piece of paper. If you just see where you're missing the most points, is it really content, or is it, oh, I'm not interpreting the passage, I'm not finding things in the passage? If you're getting stuck in all the minutia and you're not focusing on the high yield stuff, the stuff that keeps coming up again and again, you're not doing the things where you can just get a couple more points in each section. And so truly, active learning, you could take a bunch of practice tests, but if you don't change anything, there's not a whole lot of active learning there. So any of you, I was never an athlete, but I read a bunch of books about running to figure out how to improve my performance in running. like find the experts who really can help you improve your performance on a standardized test. I mean, it's out there. It's not a secret. I don't know. People always ask me about like commercial prep programs and things. I'm like, I don't know. I've never done it, so I can't comment on it. But folks that I've talked to have said, you know, the thing about commercial prep programs, it's just kind of like helping you with accountability. But if you have a workout partner, if you ever had a workout partner, you realize what you need for accountability. It's just somebody who says, hey, you didn't meet me at the library to do like the next 10, you know, chem phys questions that we were going to go through. What's up with that? That's all you need for accountability. All right, it is 3:28. I'm going to stop my mansplaining here. I don't know if I missed questions in the chat. Other thoughts?
This is President Marcotte. I want to thank you both for your service, first and foremost. I really enjoyed this, Captain. I think you kind of opened up. I was going to send you a chat and you stopped, so I'm going to just say thank you in person here. I think you've opened up the potential of a different pathway that may be different for some of our students. And I think that's really, really good. And I really thank you for doing that. I think this is an exciting area where our students could give some thought. As you say, this may not be for everyone, but it will be for someone. And I love what you presented, and thank you, Mr. Willis, as well. I hope our students will be in contact with you. And I'm going to have to buzz off to another commitment here, but thank you so much. And thanks to all the students for sitting in. I think this, again, is a way of expanding thought processes for the future. And I think this is a great one. What an exciting thing you've done, Captain. What a great background and what experiences you've seen. And, you know, I hope our students will take note of that and hopefully get in contact with you again. So I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining on the call. Thank you, Kevin, for orchestrating this. I appreciate it very much. I'll see you all later. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Hey, Doc, you have Paula had her hand up. Paula Avery.
The registrar, fire away.
Hi, thank you both so much. Thank you for your service and thank you for being with us, sharing all of this. I love your presentation style. I think you are great and exactly how our students need to hear things. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Students, I wanted to let you know, Dr. Virginia Wade's oldest son is a physical therapist for the United States Air Force, currently serving in Valdosta, Georgia. And I am quite sure that Virginia would be happy to talk to you about his pathway as well, if you wanted that experience from one of our own. Thanks again for being here.
Of course. If I could just close with one thing, truly, who gets to become a doctor is a question I keep trying to wrap my head around, but I keep coming back to this conclusion, like, why not you? So if it's something you want to go after, like, you really can. It takes a lot of deliberate practice. It takes a lot of mentorship and sponsorship. But why not you? Ms. Lal, what do you got?
Actually, Silvana, did you want to say something?
Oh, no.
Okay,
Oh.
okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Oh, no, I'm fine.
So
I was just for the presentation, and it was so informative. Thank you so much. And I'm very glad for pointing out about the example with the MCAT.
Oh, I could go on for like an hour unpacking like the sample MCAT questions. Like if you guys want me to come back in a few weeks, I actually have not just biochem, but like a chem phys example from the AAMC website and a psych-soc exam, like where I just unpack it. And I'm like, you see, you do not have to be a super who a genius for these things.
Well, I was actually going to just point out, if you do have a chance to see the chat, that's exactly what some of the students have said. You know, thank you. This was informative. I enjoyed you giving an example question and going through it. Another student said they never thought of medicine in this way. So you're getting a lot of thank yous and props and shout outs in the chat. So I hope you have a chance to check that out. But definitely want to thank you, like everyone else is saying, about your presentation style. You're very engaging, you're very personal, and you also make everything very tangible, which is what, you know, the students need. Like, you brought something that could be here in the atmosphere, and you brought it more down to earth, as you said before, and just making it seem, yes, I see some students nodding, good, good, good. And then just making it seem like something that it's not this overwhelming, giant or impossible feat. And thanks for reiterating, you know, some of the messages we always tell students, especially you talked about passive learning versus active learning. And it's always helpful for, you know, to hear outsider perspectives, because they don't want to listen to mom and dad about this stuff, right? But when we bring someone else in and say the same thing, then they're all for it. So again, thank you so much for the message that you've presented here and the way that you've done it. Such a pleasure.
This was a lot of fun for me. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. We learned so much from you. Thank you for coming. It was really excellent.
So I am actually available. I can stay on for a bit, answer like any individual questions, but nobody should feel like they've stayed on. There is an official end that has happened now, but it usually what happens in the past, there's always a handful of folks who have like really specific questions that they just didn't want to ask in front of like the whole audience. But again, thanks everyone. I put my email address in the chat while back. Feel free to reach out to me, because truly, you know, when I think about building the pipeline, this is what it looks like.